The knock at my door was quiet, almost polite, but it made my bones shiver. At 72, I know the difference between a simple visitor and someone carrying news that will change your life. I opened the door. Two police officers stood there. One young, one older, both with heavy faces. "Mrs. Eleanor Hayes?" the older one asked. "Yes," I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. "Your husband, Richard Hayes, was involved in a fatal car accident tonight." "We're very sorry," the young officer said. Fatal, such a sterile word for something that felt like a jagged knife in my chest. I laughed. Not a real laugh. A soundless, hollow thing that escaped my throat. Richard had called me just 2 hours ago, telling me he'd be home soon. He was alive then. Alive. They showed me his wallet, his watch, the gold wedding band I had slipped onto his finger 51 years ago. I looked at the burned body, trying to see the man I had loved. I buried him 3 days later. I cried like a loyal wife, but deep down, a tiny voice whispered that something wasn't right. 7 nights after the funeral, I felt it. The mattress sank beside me. I jolted awake, my eyes wide. My heart stopped for a beat I cannot measure. I smelled his cologne familiar, sandalwood, the one he had worn for decades. A breath, slow, familiar. Eleanor. I froze. My mind refused to comprehend. I did not scream. I did not move. When I dared to turn, the bed was empty. Only the closet door, slightly ajar. Richard hated open closet doors. The next morning, I noticed something even stranger. His slippers. The ones I had placed beside his coffin before it was closed. Gone. That was when grief shifted into suspicion. If Richard was truly dead, then who had just been in my bed? And that question, lingering in the cold morning light, was the beginning of everything. The morning after I felt him in my bed, I did not cry. I made tea. 2 cups. One for me. One for the ghost of my husband. And I waited. You see, at 72, you learn something very important. Panic is for the young. Revenge is for the patient. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair across from me. "Richard," I said softly, "if you're alive, you've made a terrible mistake. Because I am not the woman I was 50 years ago." That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. I wanted to look at his grave, to feel something real. But when I reached his headstone, something felt wrong. The soil. It wasn't settled properly, as if it had been disturbed. I bent down slowly, carefully, and pressed my fingers into the dirt. It was loose, too loose. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I searched. I went through his study, his drawers, the locked cabinet he never allowed me to touch. And I found it. A second phone, hidden behind old tax files. The phone was charged, recently used. My husband was not dead. He was hiding. And when I unlocked the device, yes, after 51 years of marriage, I knew his codes. I saw messages that made my blood run cold. Insurance confirmed. Transfer will happen once death certificate is finalized. Don't contact the wife. The wife, not Eleanor, not darling, not my love, just the wife. That was the moment betrayal stopped hurting and started burning. Before I continue, I realized something very important. There were bank transfers scheduled, property documents prepared, my name removed quietly from accounts we built together. Richard had not only faked his death, he planned to leave me bankrupt. At 72, alone. He thought I would grieve until I died quietly. He forgot one thing. I handled our finances for 30 years. I know every signature he has ever forged. So that night, instead of crying, I made a plan. If Richard wanted to pretend he was dead, I would let him. But I would make sure that when he returned to life, he would have nothing. No money, no house, no reputation. And when I finally confront him, it will not be as a grieving widow. it will be as the woman he underestimated. And trust me, that will be his greatest mistake. The day I saw my dead husband walking across the street, I did not run to him. I followed him, slowly, carefully. At 72, people think you are invisible. That is your greatest advantage. He wore a cap pulled low over his face, casual clothes, no wedding ring. But I knew the way he walked. 51 years of marriage teaches you the rhythm of a man's footsteps. He entered a small apartment building on Maple Street, 20 minutes from the home we built together. So this is where the ghost sleeps, I thought. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I hired someone, a private investigator, young man, very polite. Thought I was a confused widow chasing grief. I let him believe that. Within 3 days, he brought me photographs. Richard, alive, laughing, and sitting across from a woman half my age, her hand on his. My husband wasn't hiding. He was celebrating. That night, I did something unexpected. I called the insurance company. I informed them I had additional documents regarding my husband's death. The next morning, I visited our lawyer. You see, Richard believed I was just the wife, but I have copies of everything. Every property deed, every shared account, every signature. And something very interesting, a clause in his business partnership stating that fraud would result in full asset seizure. He had forgotten that little detail. Men often forget the paperwork their wives organize. 3 nights later, I returned to the cemetery, not to mourn, but to confirm. With help, quiet help, we opened the grave, and inside the coffin was not my husband. It was a man with similar features. Poor soul, used as a substitute. Richard hadn't just faked his death. He had stolen someone else's identity to do it. That changed everything. This was no longer betrayal. It was a crime, and I now held the evidence. I attended my husband's second funeral that week, but this one was different. Silent, private, inside my mind, because the man I loved for 5 decades was already dead to me. Now all that remained was to bury the man who thought he could outsmart me. And I promise you, his third funeral will be very public. The night my dead husband tried to enter my house, I was ready. I had changed the locks weeks ago, but that evening I unlocked them intentionally. You see, revenge is not about anger. It is about timing. At 11:36 p.m., I heard the key slide into the door, slowly, carefully. Like a thief trying not to wake the house, I sat in my armchair, knitting. The same gray sweater I had been making the night the police told me he was dead. The door opened. Footsteps entered. Then silence. Eleanor, he whispered. I looked up, and there he was, alive, healthy. Not a single burn on his skin. He looked shocked to see me calm. Most women would scream. I smiled. You're late, Richard, I said softly. I thought you were dead. His face drained of color. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he tried to lie. I can explain, he said. Of course he could. Men always believe explanations fix betrayal. He spoke of debt, business threats, protection. Protection for me. Protect me from what? The mistress, the insurance fraud, the identity theft. I let him talk. I even poured him tea. Because while he spoke, I recorded every word. I had already contacted the insurance company. The police had reopened the investigation quietly, and our lawyer had frozen every joint asset. Richard didn't know that yet. He thought he had come home to manipulate a grieving widow. Instead, he walked into a courtroom I built inside my living room. When he finished, I stood up slowly. My dear, I said, do you know what hurts the most? He looked at me, almost hopeful. It's not that you faked your death. It's that you underestimated mine. I handed him an envelope. Inside were photographs. Him on Maple Street. Him with the young woman. Copies of bank transfers. and a grave exhumation report. His hands began to shake. For the first time in 51 years, Richard looked afraid of me. "I can fix this," he whispered. "No," I replied calmly. "You cannot." Then I said the words that ended his performance. "The police will be here in 12 minutes. That was not entirely true. They were coming. But what mattered was the fear. He ran out the back door into the night. But running only makes a man look guilty. And Richard Hayes had already buried himself. Now the only question left is how deep I intend to dig. He ran through the dark streets like a man carrying all the secrets of his life. But here's what he didn't know. I never chase. I position. I let him think he is free while I control every piece of the game. By morning, the police had officially reopened the case. Insurance fraud, identity theft, body substitution, financial conspiracy, words that sounded ugly. But I called them my allies because every account, every property document, every business share was frozen or legally moved into my name weeks ago. Richard had planned to erase me from everything I had worked for, but I had anticipated him. That afternoon, a young woman from Maple Street called. Her voice trembled. "Mrs. Hayes, I didn't know he was married." I let her speak. Then I told her the truth calmly, not bitterly, not angrily, just facts. She hung up crying. And that is when I realized revenge doesn't need anger. It just needs patience. Before I continue, dear listener, if you enjoy suspenseful true stories like mine, subscribe to the channel to follow the journey. That evening, Richard called. Blocked number. We can fix this," he whispered. Fix, such a small word for such a large betrayal. "You tried to bury me alive in paperwork," I said softly. "You replaced my life with your lies." Silence. His breathing changed. For the first time, my husband realized he was not the smartest person in the room. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. "No," I corrected him. "You were greedy." That night, he disappeared again. No dramatic chase, no shouting, just the sound of his mistakes catching up with him. And I sat calmly in my living room, knowing that when he returns, the full weight of his deception would finally reach him. The trap is set. The game is mine. And the real reckoning is coming. Richard thought he could hide forever. He thought the world had forgotten him. He was wrong. I had tracked every move, every phone call, every shadow he thought was invisible. That morning, I received confirmation from the insurance company. They had frozen his accounts completely. The documents I had gathered were ready. The police were quietly monitoring the locations he might appear in. And I waited. At 72, patience is a weapon sharper than any blade. I walked through my house. My hands ran over every surface, every memory, every scar, every photograph. And I smiled, because soon the man who tried to erase me from life would face the reality of his own lies. At dusk, I noticed something in the driveway. A car, familiar tires, familiar scratches. He had returned, not bravely, not confidently. He had returned like a shadow, unsure if it was safe to walk in the light. I opened the door slowly, and he froze. His eyes searched mine, looking for anger, pleading, hope. He found none. "Eleanor," he started. I let him finish. You know everything," he whispered finally. "Yes," I said calmly. "And you forgot one thing. I am smarter than you think." He sank into the armchair I had reserved for him. The room was silent. Not a single word escaped me until the sound of the police sirens grew near, quiet, but unmistakable. He looked at me. Fear flickered in his eyes. The man who had planned his death, his deception, his escape, now realized that every step he had taken had led him directly into my hands. And I knew in that moment that revenge was not about destruction. It was about patience, control, justice. Richard Hayes was about to face consequences he had never imagined. And I I was finally free to watch it unfold. The police arrived just as Richard realized there was no escape. He tried to speak, tried to bargain, tried to plead. But this time, I didn't flinch. I had watched him for weeks. I had gathered every piece of evidence, every hidden account, every forged document. And now, the man who once believed he could bury me alive in lies sat across from me, powerless. I can fix this, he stammered. No, I said calmly. You cannot. You've already shown the world who you are. He looked at me with desperation, eyes wide, mouth trembling. You loved me, didn't you? He whispered. I stared at him. 51 years of marriage, 51 years of patience and observation had taught me the truth. Yes, I admitted. I loved the man I thought you were. But love does not forgive betrayal. The officers read him his rights. Handcuffs clicked. For the first time, he understood that life had finally caught up with him. I walked past him, calm, unshaken. No anger, no tears, only resolve. Outside, the evening sun painted the streets gold. I breathed deeply. I was free, alive, empowered, and haunted. Richard Hayes had tried to fake death, but what he didn't realize was that he had resurrected me instead. Now, I sleep peacefully in my bed. No footsteps beside me. No lies in the closet. Just the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and strong. And that, my dear listener, was my revenge. Until next time. See you in the next video.